Life had always been predictable. My days were filled with a quiet rhythm of routine. Early mornings, the hum of the coffee machine, the warmth of a steaming cup in my hands as I stood by the window watching the sun peek over the rooftops of Atlanta. My world was one of simple joys and quiet moments. The scent of fresh bread from the bakery down the street, the distant laughter of children playing in the park, the soothing melody of a familiar hymn playing softly on the radio. I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't lost. I had faith, but I didn't live it the way I should have. I prayed, but only when I needed something. I believed, but only in moments of desperation. God was always there, somewhere in the background of my life, like a childhood friend I no longer called, but expected to be there if I ever needed him. And then came the night everything changed. It started as an ordinary evening. I had just finished washing the dishes, my fingers pruning under the warm water. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that feels comforting and familiar. I sat on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through my phone, reading headlines about war, rumors of another global conflict, the never-ending cycle of fear and destruction. It was all so distant, something that happened in other countries, to other people. Not here, not to me. A sudden, sharp pain struck my chest. At first, I thought it was nothing, just a twinge, a pulled muscle. But then it worsened. My heart pounded, erratic and forceful, as if it were trying to escape my ribs. A cold sweat broke out on my skin. The room spun. My breath came in short gasps, as though the air around me had turned to stone. I tried to call for help, but my voice wouldn't obey. My body, once so familiar, felt like a stranger's. My vision blurred, darkened. The last thing I remember was the sensation of falling, as if the world beneath me had simply disappeared. Then nothing. A vast, endless silence. And then suddenly light. It wasn't the harsh, blinding kind of light I had always imagined death would bring. It was warm, golden, like the first rays of morning stretching across the horizon. I was floating, or at least I wasn't bound to the weight of my body anymore. There was no pain, no fear, only an overwhelming sense of peace. I was being drawn forward towards something, someone, and then I saw him, a presence so powerful, so radiant, that my soul recognized him before my mind could process it. Jesus. He stood before me, not as an image from a painting or a distant figure from scripture, but as something more real than anything I had ever known. His eyes held eternity in them, filled with a love so profound it brought me to my knees. He didn't speak with words, yet I understood him perfectly. There was a truth he needed to show me, a truth about what was coming. The vision unfolded before me, and my heart trembled at what I saw. A world teetering on the edge of chaos, war spreading like wildfire, cities in ruins, families torn apart by fear and suffering. And yet, amid the destruction, there was something else, something darker, more sinister than anything I could comprehend. A deception so great that even those who claimed to follow the truth would be blinded by it. I wanted to turn away, to unsee what had been revealed to me. But I couldn't, because this was not just a vision. It was a warning. If you are here right now, it's not by chance. You are part of this community, a family of faith and truth seekers. If you believe in divine revelations, if you want to be prepared for what is coming, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. It helps this message reach more people who need to hear it. And now I have something special for you. In this video, we will be sending a personal message to someone who commented their name and city in our last video. If you want to be featured in the next one, receive a special blessing, and have your name spoken in front of thousands, comment below with your name and city. Imagine the joy of hearing your name in a community of believers. Don't miss this chance. Keep watching until the end to see who was chosen for today's special message. I was standing in a place that felt like nowhere and everywhere at once. There was no ground beneath my feet, yet I felt stable. There was no wind, yet I felt movement. Time did not exist here, and yet I knew that what was happening was both immediate and eternal. Jesus stood before me, his presence overwhelming yet gentle, powerful yet filled with kindness. I could feel his love radiating through me like a fire that did not burn. But in his eyes, there was also sorrow, a deep, profound grief, not for himself, but for us. He lifted his hand, and suddenly I was no longer where I had been. I was being shown something beyond the veil of this world. I saw cities crumbling, not from the passage of time, but from destruction, war, and chaos. Buildings that once stood as symbols of power and prosperity were reduced to ash. The streets were filled with the cries of the innocent, the desperate prayers of those who had lost everything. It was not a distant war in a faraway land. It was here. It was everywhere. I saw leaders standing in rooms filled with shadows, their voices calm, yet filled with deceit. They spoke of peace, yet behind their words, I saw weapons being prepared. The world was being led into destruction, and most could not even see it. Then I saw something even more terrifying. A darkness creeping over the earth. Not the darkness of night, but something living, something with purpose. It slithered through the hearts of men, twisting truth into lies, turning love into hatred. It whispered promises of power, control, and salvation, but those who listened to it found only ruin. And yet, even in the midst of such horror, I saw something else. A light. It was small at first, just a flicker, but it grew stronger. It came from those who had not been deceived, from those who still held onto the truth. Their faith was like a flame that could not be extinguished, even as the world turned against them. They were the ones who understood. They were the ones who had seen the signs. I turned back to Jesus, my soul trembling. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Because the time was near. Because the world was asleep. Because the greatest deception in human history was about to unfold. And I had been sent back to warn them. I wanted to look away. I wanted to close my eyes, to pretend I had not seen what was unfolding before me. But I couldn't. The vision continued, unraveling like a prophecy written in fire, burning itself into my soul. I stood on the edge of a battlefield, but there were no soldiers, no banners waving in the wind. This was not a war of nations or armies. This was something far greater, far more terrifying. It was a war of truth and deception, of light and darkness. The world I once knew was unrecognizable. Cities lay in ruins, the remnants of civilization buried beneath smoke and ash. People wandered through the streets like ghosts, their faces hollow, their eyes filled with a terror that had long since become exhaustion. They had been promised safety, but they had found only destruction. Above them, towering figures stood in the shadows, leaders, powerful and untouchable, their faces unreadable. They did not weep for the broken world beneath them. They did not feel sorrow for the suffering. They had orchestrated it. And then I saw it, the deception. It did not come in the form of war or bloodshed. It did not announce itself with violence or destruction. It came wrapped in promises, in words of peace, in the illusion of salvation. A man stood before the nations, his voice calm, his presence commanding. He spoke of unity, of a new era, of a world rebuilt from the ashes of the old. His words were honey, dripping with a sweetness that soothed the wounded hearts of the desperate. And they believed him. I saw people bow before him, not in worship, but in surrender. They laid down their doubts, their questions, their faith. He offered them security, and in return, they gave him their souls. But behind his eyes, I saw something else. A darkness deeper than the void. A hunger that could never be satisfied. A power that was not his own. I wanted to scream, to warn them, but they could not hear me. They were blind to the truth, deaf to the voice of reason. And then I saw those who refused to bow. A small group, scattered and few in number, but their faith burned like a beacon in the storm. They had seen through the illusion. They had not been deceived. They clung to the truth, even as the world turned against them. I watched as they were hunted, branded as traitors, cast out of society. They lost everything, homes, jobs, families. But they did not lose their faith. And then I saw the moment that changed everything. A single event. a spark that ignited the fire. The man who had promised peace removed his mask, revealing his true nature. And by then, it was too late. The war had already begun. The world had already chosen its side. And those who stood in the light would soon face the full force of the darkness. But they would not stand alone, because something greater was coming. The world had changed. The deception had spread like wildfire, consuming nations, leaders, and even those who once held strong in their beliefs. The promise of peace had been nothing more than a veil, a beautifully crafted lie that hid the darkness beneath. And now, the choice was no longer a matter of belief. It was survival. I saw people lining up in the streets, standing beneath giant screens where a new order was being announced. It was not a war of weapons, but of control. Those who complied were given everything they needed: food, shelter, security. Those who resisted were cast out, treated as dangers to society. And then I saw the mark. It wasn't forced upon them, not at first. It was given as a choice, an opportunity, a way to participate in the new world. It was a symbol of unity, a mark of acceptance. The people were told it would make life easier, more connected. No more division, no more war. But I could see the truth. Once taken, it was more than just a mark. It changed them, not their bodies, but their souls. I saw the light in their eyes fade, the last remnants of faith snuffed out like a candle in the wind. They did not even realize what they had given up. And then I saw those who refused. They were hunted, outcasts in their own cities, hiding in the ruins of a world they no longer recognized. They lived in secret, whispering prayers in the shadows, knowing that at any moment they could be discovered. I saw one of them, a woman, her clothes torn, her hands trembling as she held a small child in her arms. She had lost everything, yet her faith remained unshaken. She looked up at the sky, her lips moving in silent prayer. And in that moment, I understood. This was the test. Not of strength, not of intelligence, but of faith. Those who held on, those who refused to bow, would suffer. They would be cast out, betrayed, broken. But they would not be forgotten. Because the battle was not yet over. Because something greater was coming. And the world was about to witness a power it had long forgotten. If you are watching this right now, it is not a coincidence. You were meant to be here. Now, I have a special invitation for you. We are building a community of faith, a place where those who seek the truth can come together. If you want to be part of this movement, leave a like on this video and comment your name and the city you are watching from. Imagine hearing your name spoken in front of thousands of people in our next video. A small moment of recognition, a special blessing just for you. And don't go anywhere. Stay with us until the end of this video, because we will reveal who has been chosen for today's special message. The world was no longer the same. It had been reshaped by forces unseen, by decisions made in silence, by whispers that had turned into commands. The deception had taken root so deeply that few could even remember the truth. They had accepted the new order as if it had always been this way, as if history itself had been rewritten. But in the shadows, in the quiet places where the voices of the forgotten still echoed, there were those who remembered. They were not warriors in the traditional sense. They held no weapons, commanded no armies. Their power came from something else, something far more dangerous to those who sought control: faith. These people had been stripped of their homes, their rights, their place in society. They were outlaws, fugitives in their own land, but they had something that the others had lost: the understanding that this world was not the end. They knew what was coming. They had seen the signs. I walked among them, unseen yet present, as they gathered in secret. There were no grand speeches, no shouts of defiance. Their strength lay in silence, in whispered prayers, in hands clasped together beneath the veil of night. They did not fight with swords, but with unwavering belief. And yet, they were afraid. I could feel it in the way they glanced over their shoulders, in the way they spoke in hushed tones. The enemy they faced was not one of flesh and blood. It was something else, something more insidious. It was in the air, in the unseen currents that moved through the world, tightening around them like an invisible chain. Then, the sky darkened. At first, it was subtle, clouds rolling in where the forecast had promised clear skies and unnatural stillness in the wind. But then, the change became undeniable. A deep rumbling, not from the earth, but from something beyond it. It was a sound that could not be explained, a vibration that resonated within the very bones of those who stood beneath it. People emerged from their hiding places, eyes turned upward. They knew this was no ordinary storm. And then, the lights appeared. Not from the heavens, but from the horizon. Glowing, pulsing, moving in unnatural patterns. At first, they seemed distant, but then they grew larger, closer. And with them came something else, a wave of energy that pressed down on everything, suffocating, paralyzing. I saw people drop to their knees, clutching their heads as if something unseen had reached into their minds. Others stood frozen, their bodies rigid, their eyes vacant. They were being called, drawn toward the lights like moths to a flame. I wanted to scream, to tell them to resist. But no one could hear me. And then, through the chaos, I saw them. The ones who remained standing, untouched by whatever force had overtaken the others. Their faces were filled with fear, but they did not fall. They did not yield. They clung to something greater, something unseen yet unshaken. The storm was only beginning, and the battle for their souls had just begun. The world had never been so silent. Not the peaceful silence of a morning before sunrise, nor the comforting stillness of a quiet prayer. This was the silence of something unnatural, something waiting to strike. The lights in the sky still hovered, pulsing in rhythmic patterns, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. But they were not mere illusions. They carried something within them, something ancient, something deceptive. The people who had fallen under their influence no longer looked human. Their eyes were voids, their expressions devoid of recognition. They moved in unison, guided by an unseen force, walking towards something none of them could see. And then a voice spoke, not with sound, but directly into the mind.
Come.
The world as you knew it is gone.
There is no need to resist.
We bring order. We bring peace. I saw those who had already fallen nod in silent agreement, their movements synchronized like puppets on invisible strings. But those who had remained untouched, the ones who had not bowed, who had not been deceived, shuddered as the voice echoed inside them. They knew the truth. This was not peace. This was submission. And now the world was dividing. I watched as families were torn apart, husbands calling out for wives who no longer recognized them, parents begging their children to remember who they were. The deception was not just external, it was internal. It had invaded minds, rewritten identities. Those who had accepted it were no longer themselves. The ones who remained stood in scattered groups, their numbers painfully small. They were exhausted, hungry, uncertain of what to do next. But they were still free, and that made them dangerous. Because despite everything, despite the fear, despite the overwhelming power against them, they still believed. I turned to look at the sky once more, and suddenly, a new image unfolded before me. This time, not just a vision, but a revelation. I saw what was coming. The man who had promised peace was preparing for his final move. The world was in chaos, and the people were desperate. They had already given up their freedom in exchange for security, and now, they would give up what remained of their souls. I saw him standing in the heart of a great city, surrounded by thousands. His voice was calm, reassuring, filled with promises of a new beginning. He held something in his hand, a symbol, a mark, and one by one, they stepped forward to receive it. The last step, the final acceptance of the deception. And those who refused, I saw them dragged into the streets, accused of crimes they had not committed. I saw their names erased, their existence denied. They were made into villains, branded as enemies of the new world. And yet, even as they faced the wrath of an entire world turned against them, I saw something else. They did not fall. They did not beg. They stood. Their faces were lifted to the sky, their hands clasped in prayer. They had lost everything, yet they had already won, because they understood the truth. This was not the end. It was only the beginning. The night stretched endlessly, an abyss of darkness that swallowed everything in its path. But within that darkness, small fires burned, hidden, scattered, but alive. I found myself among those who refused to submit, those who had seen through the deception and chosen to stand against it. They were few, their bodies weary, their voices hushed. But their faith had not wavered. They gathered in the ruins of an abandoned church, its walls cracked, its stained glass windows shattered. Yet, even in its brokenness, the place still held something sacred. A woman knelt at the altar, her hands trembling as she whispered prayers into the silence. An old man sat nearby, clutching a worn Bible, his lips moving without sound. A young boy, no older than 10, clung to his mother, his wide eyes filled with questions he did not dare ask. They had lost everything: homes, loved ones, the world they once knew. And yet, they had not lost hope. Outside, the city pulsed with a new kind of life. The deception had completed its work. The people had accepted the mark, surrendered to the promise of a false salvation. They no longer questioned, no longer resisted. They belonged to the new world. The man who had deceived them stood at its center, his power absolute. His voice echoed through the streets, promising prosperity, unity, an end to suffering. But I knew the truth. The suffering had only just begun, because those who refused to bow would be hunted. I saw it in the eyes of those gathered in the church. They knew what was coming. The choice had been made, and now they would face the consequences. The doors burst open. Figures clad in black stormed inside, their movements swift and practiced. There were no shouts, no warnings. They had come to silence the last voices of resistance. The woman at the altar rose to her feet, her eyes shining with something beyond fear. The old man clutched his Bible tighter, his expression unshaken. The young boy buried his face in his mother's chest, but she held her ground. I expected them to fight, to resist, but they did something else. They knelt, not in surrender, but in prayer. Their lips moved in unison, their voices rising above the chaos, a hymn of defiance against the darkness. And in that moment, something happened. A light, soft at first, then blinding, filled the room. It did not come from the broken chandeliers or the shattered windows. It came from within them. And for the first time, I saw fear in the eyes of those who had come to destroy them, because they realized the truth too late. This war was never about power. It was about faith. And faith could not be broken. The vision faded, but its truth remained. The time was near. The choice had already been made. And soon, the world would see the final battle unfold. If you made it this far, you are part of something special. A community of truth seekers, of those who are not afraid to stand for what is right. We don't do this for money. We do this because we believe in the message, in the power of faith, in the importance of knowing the truth. If you feel the same, your support means everything. A simple like a subscription, it helps this message reach those who need to hear it the most. Be part of this community. Stand with us. Subscribe, leave a like, and let's continue this journey together. The air was thick with something unseen, a weight that pressed against the soul rather than the body. The city, once alive with movement and sound, now stood eerily still. The people who had accepted the new order walked with vacant eyes, their expressions void of the spirit that once made them human. They were no longer individuals but a collective, a mass of obedience molded by deception. And then the sky changed. A deep rumble shook the earth, a sound that did not come from thunder or war machines, but from something greater. The clouds churned unnaturally, rolling over each other in chaotic waves. The wind carried whispers, words unspoken yet understood by those who had ears to hear. I stood among those who had not bowed, those who had refused to take the mark. Their faces were set with determination, their bodies weary but unbroken. And then I saw it. A great figure emerged, standing atop the highest point of the city. He was draped in light, yet his eyes held shadows that no human could comprehend. He raised his hand, and the people who had submitted to him fell to their knees in reverence. A single command echoed through the city: not spoken, but felt. It is done. The war was over. The world was his. And yet, even in that moment of total dominion, the deception was not complete, because the prophecy was not yet fulfilled. A sound, unlike anything the world had ever known, pierced the sky. It was not from the earth, nor from the heavens, but from the space between, an undeniable force that shattered the illusion of peace. The faithful, those who had resisted, turned their faces upward. Tears streamed down their cheeks, not from fear, but from recognition. They had waited for this moment. The figure atop the city clenched his fists, his expression shifting for the first time. The deception was failing. The people who had fallen under his spell trembled, their bodies racked with confusion. Something within them, something buried beneath layers of lies, was beginning to awaken. The veil was lifting, and the world was about to see the truth. The final battle had begun. The sky above was no longer the sky I had known. It was alive, shifting, churning with something beyond human comprehension. It was as if the heavens themselves had split open, revealing the truth that had been hidden for so long. The deception had reached its peak. The false peace, the illusion of unity, had crumbled under the weight of something far greater, reality. The figure who had claimed dominion over the world now stood motionless, his once commanding presence beginning to falter. And then the ground shook. Not like an earthquake, but something deeper. The very foundation of existence trembled, as if it, too, had been waiting for this moment. The faithful, those who had not been deceived, felt it in their souls before their bodies even registered it. The time had come. The deception was collapsing, and with it, the veil that had blinded so many. I watched as those who had once bowed in submission now looked around in fear. They could feel it too, that something was shifting, that the power they had surrendered to was no longer absolute. Some fell to their knees, weeping as understanding dawned upon them. Others clutched their heads, torn between the lie they had lived and the truth now breaking through. But for the faithful, for those who had endured, this was not a moment of fear. It was a moment of confirmation, a moment that had been foretold. A great light pierced the sky, silencing everything. The false leader stumbled backward, his form flickering as though he were merely a shadow cast by something greater. The war was ending, not with weapons, not with armies, but with truth. And in that truth, the faithful found their strength. One by one, they lifted their heads, their eyes unafraid, their voices rising together, not in screams, not in battle cries, but in a single word that carried through the heavens like thunder.
Amen.
If you believe in the power of faith, if you are standing in the truth, let your voice be heard. Comment Amen below to be blessed, to declare your faith, and to show that you are awake to the truth. Your words have power. Your faith has meaning. Leave a like on this video, and let the light continue to shine in this community. Together, we are stronger. The world as I had known it no longer existed. Everything had been stripped away, the illusions, the deceptions, the false promises that had led so many into darkness. The battle had not been fought with swords or guns, but with something far greater, truth. And now, the truth was shining for all to see. The sky above, once shrouded in unnatural darkness, had begun to clear. It was not the light of the sun that broke through, but something divine, something eternal. It illuminated every corner of the earth, revealing things that had long been hidden. I saw the faithful standing in awe, their faces lifted toward the heavens, their eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming peace. They had endured, they had remained steadfast, and now they were witnessing the promise fulfilled. But those who had fallen under deception, they were collapsing. Their bodies trembled as the realization dawned upon them. The power they had given themselves to had crumbled, and now they were left with nothing. They had traded eternity for comfort, truth for lies, and now the weight of their choices bore down upon them. Some cried out in anguish, reaching toward the light as if hoping to grasp even the smallest piece of what they had lost. Others stood frozen, unable to process the horror of their mistake. And then I saw him. Not as I had before, not as a vision, not as a distant presence, but as he truly was. Jesus. There was no doubt, no hesitation. Every soul, every being recognized him. The power of his presence alone sent waves through the world, shaking the very core of existence. His eyes held love, but they also held justice. He was not here to condemn. He was here to fulfill what had been spoken from the beginning. I fell to my knees, unable to do anything else. And then in an instant I knew. Everything I had seen, everything I had experienced had led to this moment. The warnings had been given. The signs had been shown. The choice had always been there. And now it was time. A great wind swept through the earth, separating those who had remained faithful from those who had rejected the truth. There was no violence, no struggle, only the undeniable reality that the time of decision had passed. I wanted to reach out, to plead with those who had been deceived. But it was too late. The world was not ending, it was being remade. And those who had held on to the truth, those who had suffered and endured, were about to step into something far greater than they had ever imagined. Something eternal. Before we go, I have something very special to share. A message of love and blessing for two wonderful members of our community. Cynthia from Beaverton, Michigan. May your heart always be filled with light and your faith never waver. You are seen, you are loved, and your journey is guided by divine hands. May you continue to walk in strength and grace. Janae Dogan from New Jersey. You are a beacon of faith. May the presence of God always be with you, guiding your steps and filling your days with peace. Never doubt the power of your prayers, for they are heard. Now, my dear friend, this is not the end. There is something even more important waiting for you. A new revelation, one that will change your perspective forever. Click on the video appearing on your screen now. It is meant for you. Trust me, you won't want to miss it. And if this message spoke to you, if it stirred something in your soul, leave a like and make sure you are subscribed. Together, we are more than just viewers. We are a community, a family in faith.